Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show, talking today about insulation on historic houses, how to think about it, and I'm going to show you why we're not going to do insulation on our oldest house today on the Build Show. Insulation on historic houses and how we handle them. We've got three projects. We've got that 1870s house down near Houston, which is a early settlers house with a 1912 addition, a 1950, right? We've got the 1881 house in Granbury, which is another early historic house. And then we got that 1938 Dilbeck. Each one is pre-1940. Each one has challenges and its own list of things of how to insulate. Now, realize when I talk about insulation and talking about insulation on the Build Show with the likes of Matt and Steve and Jake and these guys that are experts in energy efficiency and build science, you feel a little intimidated, especially when I think about doing insulation on these houses and considering not doing insulation. So, how did we think about it? Now, the 1870s house, okay, so we've got an 1870s house, we've got siding on the outside, drop siding on the outside, and we've got beadboard on the inside. Both are historic fabrics that we don't want to mess with. We don't want to ruin the architectural and historic integrity. I can't put insulation in this wall, one, because I can't take off that historic fabric and get insulation in there. I can, okay, I know how to do it, but I don't want to do it because there is an historic integrity to this house that I don't want to mess up. And if I put insulation in this wall, if I blew foam in there, right, and filled up that cavity with foam, the problem is that now I've got no air moving between that cavity. So if I fill this up with foam and, basically stop any air movement, create a vapor barrier and everything else that foam would do, I have now created more problems for myself. Okay, because what happens is if I fill this up with foam, now the outside of, when water hits the outside of this building, it's going to sit there, it's going to get trapped right here, and it's going to cause rot and decay, and the paint will peel off because it can't breathe. And I've created problems by putting insulation into this cavity. The thing I want to encourage you that if you have an historic house, kind of the way to think about it, this house has been here for 150 years. Okay, 150 years. We are not talking about, I do not want a solution that will provide them, energy comfort for 10 years before the thing rots out and falls apart, okay? I had a discussion with them and I said, what we're gonna do is we're gonna insulate your roof, we're gonna insulate your floor, but we're not gonna insulate your walls, okay? I don't like foam, right? I have had problems, and despite the fact that, I've heard some build science people say that, rotting of your walls and rotting of the thing with foam insulation doesn't really happen, it's an urban myth. Not true. It's happened to me twice, okay? And so we've had two projects where water had gotten into the ceiling like a wet sponge in there, never dried, and the wood and everything else slowly started to rot. It probably was in there for a year or two. And so it was embarrassing for me to have to go back to the owner when they call and say, by the way, I just stuck my finger through the ceiling boards. I think we've got a problem, right? It's embarrassing for me to kind of go back and go, oh, what were we thinking? Another project where water got in, wrecked the floorboards. The water got in behind the foam, floated down the foam, went out the floorboards. We put our moisture meter, check everything. It's not until we dig behind the foam and that we feel the wet against the wall that we start going, not only is foam either holding on to the water and creating a problem, or it's hiding the water and the water is getting through, and in that case, it was warping the floorboards. So I have become an anti-foamer, right? I don't want to put something in my houses that's going to cause them to last a short amount of time. I fear that we are sacrificing, longevity for, comfort and short-term comfort. And so I'm no longer going to be using foam on our projects, right? Maybe in a crawl space, maybe below a crawl space where we get the concrete and everything wrapped out the base. Maybe there with a closed cell foam, but when you get it into the walls and get it into the ceiling, I just had too much bad luck. I'm not going to do it. So as I look at these historic projects that we're doing, right, I am recalibrating my head that it isn't a case where I've got to have an HCH 1.6 or a blower door situation where I'm trying to get a really low number. This is never going to be a passive house. They don't want it to be a passive house. And so what's the balance? And that really is the key, guys, is finding out how to find balance in these things. So I'm going to walk you through how I'm approaching each of these different houses so we can think about insulation and what not to do. So house number one, the oldest house, we're going to insulate the ceiling, okay? I'm going to stop the heat gain up there. We've got a raised seam roof. We may do a cool board, but probably just rock wool insulation in the ceiling. We're going to put rock wool on the floor, right? So we're going to seal the floor for any vapor that might be coming up from the ground. We're going to cool the ceiling, but we're not going to put insulation in the walls. You heard me. We're not going to put insulation in the walls. House number two, 1881 in Granbury, right? We have the same situation. We have a wood studded framed house with an original drop siding on the outside. Now the difference in this house is that they originally had plaster walls on the inside, but those plaster walls have been taken off. So all I've got is sheetrock there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put a diplomat right here, right there in the cavity, okay? So if this is my cavity, I'm going to take a diplomat, I'm going to put it right like this inside that stud, okay? Then I'm going to put the rock wool insulation inside of that. Now why am I doing that? If I create an air barrier here, right? So the air can pass up through here, right? I am not going to cause the paint to come off the siding once it gets repainted. I created that air gap there so air can still move behind there, so when this gets wet, it can still dry out. And that's really what's going to help this. You know, this is 140 years old, lasts another 140 years. But because I don't have anything on the inside, I don't have historic integrity like I do here, and I can't, you know, get in there and I don't have room and access to put a dimple mat in here. I have access here, so I'm going to take advantage of that, create the air barrier, fill up my cavity with insulation, and then put the, you know, plaster, sheetrock, whatever we decide to put back in there over the inside, and I have a lot more comfort, okay? So there's a situation where because of the access from the inside, I actually can insulate this wall. 1938 Dilbeck, okay? On this house, I have stone and brick on the outside, right? Then on top of that, or inside of that, I have an air gap, right? So I have an air gap right in here. And then I have sheathing, okay? So, you know, there's a shiplap sheathing on the outside of the house, probably with the tar paper. I haven't looked, but most likely there's a tar paper there. So I actually already have some things for the air to move. And if water hits here, right, and it absorbs on here, it can actually breathe out again. So actually, I don't have a problem with insulation on this house, and any exterior wall that we exposed, we do plan to put rock wool insulation on the inside of this house on exterior walls because this can breathe. It's a system that's been built, you know, now it's 90 years old, right? And this system will breathe. This system, I can put insulation in the walls, so we are insulating this. Okay, guys, so sharing this information with you because I know a lot of build science guys watch this channel, and a lot of build science guys are wanting to build the most efficient and perfect house. I want to throw in there that the balance is longevity. When we introduce new technology into these houses, air conditioning and these other things, it can create problems. It can create challenges. And the builder that's going to be building that house down there was like, why don't we just foam it up? Why don't we just... And you can't do that, or you got to think carefully about how we're doing that in these houses. And I want to challenge you that for some of these projects, if you don't have air gaps and you don't have the ability to breathe, that insulation may not be the right answer. And so I talked to the homeowner about the 1870s house and was just like, look, this house hasn't had air conditioning ever, and that's why I think it's lasted so long. But there is a balance, right? There is a thing that we're trying to strike, and I want you guys to find that balance too, but don't just open up your walls, blowing foam, and think you've done the best thing you can. We are pivoting towards rock wool. We think that is a great solution. We think that those guys make a lot of sense. Learning to become a better builder is a constant step of managing, thinking, watching, you know, figuring out how to build best, how to build right. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook, Hull Millwork, Hull Homes. Sign up for the newsletter, and if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.